Hey everyone, Andrew here, and it's time for another top five. This isn't what I actually planned to do or anything of that nature. I ended up getting inspired to do this because I've watched a bunch of people do like the worst comic book films of all time, and I watched a bunch of there's like a bunch of people that did like four or five of those, and it's just like I went through all of them, and I'm like, really? Some of these? Like one of them was like Dark Phoenix is one of the worst comic book films ever, and I'm like, Dark Phoenix isn't even the worst X-Men film. What are you talking about? Like, it's bad. It's not the worst. It's still a somewhat it's a comprehensive movie. You can understand what's going on. But there was a lot and I was going through it. And so I went through all of my comic book films that I've seen and I did ratings for myself and I will include a link below that is the best to worst of that. And I realized that like my bottom five comic book films, especially like superhero based comic book films, wasn't on any of those people's lists. And yeah, no, I'm gonna talk about them, like, because some of these films deserve the hate I'm about to spew towards them, and the other films that get hate that don't deserve it. Because we all know the films that they would put on these kinds of lists, right? Green Lantern, Superman 4, Dark Phoenix, New Mutants. Yeah, none of those are on my list. Shoot, and on my bottom five, there's no X-Men, no Superman, no Batman. Like mine are all obscure. Like they're all either one-time attempts for these characters or like just really bad interpretations. But yeah, we're gonna go through it. So will be my top five worst comic book superhero films. I'm specifically doing the comic book superhero films as opposed to doing just comics in general because I wanted to focus it a little bit more and do a little bit different in the tone and what I was aiming for. That said, I will include in my dishonorable mentions some of the lowest rated comic book films had I chose to do this. Let's go on. Start with number five. Red Sonja, Queen of Plagues. Now, you're gonna be having one of two reactions: either "What in the world is that?" or "Do you mean the 1980s, 1990s one starring Bridget Nielsen and Arnold Schwarzenegger?" No, that one is just Red Sonja. That one's actually not too bad. It's a little goofy and a little ridiculous, but it's a lot of fun, and I enjoyed that one quite a bit. No, this is a 2016 motion comic, which means it's an animated film that is just basically still images from the comic with voiceover, which automatically puts it out of the running for best film of all time type of thing because it's still images and talking. But I tried to be fair with this one and take it on a thing, and I'm like, I've done motion comics before, and I just tried to treat it as an audiobook with occasionally with pictures. So I was like, that was how I went into this. And I did not make it far into the film because the audio in this and the way the people were talking was terrible. The audio quality isn't the problem. It's not like they had bad microphones or anything of that nature. But you can tell that whoever was directing the actors in this did not care and didn't put any effort into it. And it's like, it's so you either get one of two things. You either get people that are completely monotone and have no actual emotion behind anything that they say, or you get people that don't know the context of what they're saying, so they say it in a weird way. And I've seen this happen before on like fan dubs and that stuff. Like I watched one just today where the girl who was doing the fan dubbing clearly didn't figure out how the comic was supposed to flow. So she would have the characters answer before the question was asked because she just read what was first written. So it'd be like, "Oh, I'm doing fine. How are you? How are you doing, Adrian?" It's like it would be things like that where it's like, wait, you did that backwards. You need to have done the first thing first. And you get a little bit of that here, but this one it's mostly context and tone. And that you can look at the words and look at the way it's written and tell that it's supposed to be said in a specific way. That it has supposed to have this certain cadence, this certain tone to it. And then the actor doesn't do that at all. Just completely negates how the story is supposed to be heard. And it's almost unwatchable. Like I said, I had a hard time with it. I did not get very far into it. It might get better as it goes on. I don't know, but I could definitely tell you if the little bit that I saw is enough for me to put it on the list. It is just almost unlistenable, and then there's nothing on the screen to really look at, so it's double bad. It's pure grade amateur hour stuff. Like, literally, I've seen amateurs have more inflection and better use of language than these guys. And the company that did this, the people that made it, the people that did all this, had never done this kind of animation dubbing before, and from what I saw, they haven't done anything since, and that's probably a good thing, because this was honestly terrible. Jonah Hex. I really wanted this one to be good. Like, I went into it with hopes, because you had Josh Brolin playing Jonah Hex, and they had the makeup on him, and the effect looked really good, and I had potential of it. And I should have known it was terrible when I went to go see it, because I went to see it in theaters. I showed up for like a 1:30 showing, and talked to the person, and they're like, "Oh, we canceled the 1:30 showing. We're not going to show it until 5." And I stuck around and waited to go see this film. And this isn't like late into its showing. This was like opening week. And the film was bad enough that they were literally pulling times because nobody was going to see it. I was the only one at 5 o'clock that went to see it, and I regret it. It was bad. Like, Josh Brolin is not a problem in this film. He tries. He gets the mannerisms down for the most part. It's not terrible, but he gets the idea of the character squared away pretty well. But it's kind of like his Cable character if he doesn't have Deadpool to work off of in Deadpool 2. Like, in a Western, but everyone is really bad in the Western, that's kind of Jonah Hex. Like, the main love interest is Megan Fox, and she's the most on autopilot that I've ever seen her on. And she's usually on autopilot, so it's really, really bad if I'm saying that this is the worst version of that. The main villain is John Malkovich, and he is chewing the scenery as hard as he freaking can. Like I'm amazed the film doesn't break halfway through because he chewed through the film. And the entire plot doesn't make sense. It's like, I'm stealing these 3 giant metal balls because I can launch them into towns and it'll blow the city to smithereens, and I'm like, if you have the ability to launch these 3 giant metal balls and you have a cannon that can do that, you can just literally fill them with regular bombs and it will destroy a town, especially in this time frame. Like, you don't need this stupid weird mega weapon from now in this type of film. It's a Western. Literally, a person with a Gatling gun is the most powerful person in the land. Like, and none of the action works. None of the fighting scenes are good. Most of the effects are not great, except for the effect on Jonah Hex. That's the only thing that works fairly well. And there's a point in this where Jonah Hex gets his hands on one of the villains, and he kills the villain, and then he reaches in and pulls the villain's soul out, which he has the ability to do. And then he takes the soul and shoves it up against the back of a ship's propeller. And he's like, "This is for my family," and eviscerates this thing. Sitting here watching it going, was he even there when your son was killed? And I round back and looked, and yes, he is there, but like, he is not the main villain, and he gets the most gruesome kill of the entire film. And the main villain doesn't get much of anything. And it just seemed like really strong overkill for not even the biggest baddie. Nothing in this worked. It's just so over the top and doesn't know what it wants to be, and is trying. It reminds me a lot of Battleship, where it's like, This should have been simple. This should have been just a really good Western, and then you try to make it a sci-fi thing, and it's like terrible. It's also very reminiscent of Wild Wild West. It's just you don't need to do that. Just do a normal Western with a little bit of an influence. Like you don't even need to try that hard. Like God. Ultraviolet. So, this is a post-apocalyptic kind of futuristic superhero film starring Mila Jovovich, and it is almost unwatchable. This is just an awful film. Like the plot makes no freaking sense. Like there's a virus out there that has turned people into vampires, but it's made them faster, stronger, and uber smart. So I'm like, well, why wouldn't everyone just want to be vampires? And the plot makes no sense. It's all basically this woman, Ultraviolet, went to go steal the cure or something, and all she finds is a boy who may or may not be her child, and then spends the entire rest of the film trying to protect him. And it's like, oh gosh, like even when this film came out back in 2006, that plot line had been done to death of super, heroic person must protect the child whose future. Like, jeez Louise. And it makes no sense. The action is so poorly shot. Mila Jovovich changes her wig for every scene that she's in, so she's never in the same look twice. And it's horribly shot, horribly put together. The plot makes no freaking sense. It's just a boring, terrible slog of a film that, like, this puts all of the Resident Evil sequels to shame with how terrible this is. Like, I would watch any of the Resident Evil sequels again before I would watch Ultraviolet again. Just awful. Like, ugh. And it's like, that's another thing. It's like, Ultraviolet is pretty much her character from Resident Evil. Used to be an actress with a bit of range, and now she just kind of plays really terrible action heroes. God, the number of bad Mila Jovovich films I've seen is too many. It's like, I feel like most of the films she's made in the last 20 years have been terrible. And that makes me sad. But yeah, no, Ultraviolet definitely deserves to be listed as one of the worst comic book superhero films of all time. Captain America and Captain America 2, Death Too Soon. Yeah, so this is not the MCU Captain America films. This is the Marvel Captain America films from the 1970s. Specifically, both films came out in 1979. And I'm pretty sure they were direct to DVD, or directly to they were TV films, I'm pretty sure. And it's just like, so when Marvel tried to make these superhero films, especially during this time frame, during the 70s and the early 80s, they had no idea what they were doing, and they just made absolute garbage films. Like, they had no idea how to make a superhero film interesting, at least from the Marvel side during this time frame. Like you can literally just compare this film here to Superman that came out in around the same time, and it's like, they are so far apart in quality, it is ridiculous. So, Steve Rogers in this is not a soldier, he is an artist who got murdered by spies. And they injected him with a secret formula that gave him super strength? Kind of? He doesn't do much with it, so it doesn't make much sense. So he decides that he's going to fight the spies using his powers. And so he becomes Captain America, and his helmet is a literal bike helmet. Like, they didn't do anything great with his design. It's like the helmet is an actual helmet. His mask is the goggles that come with the helmet. His shield is clearly plastic and see-through and is the size of a dinner plate. It's just tiny as heck. He rides around on a motorcycle that he stores in the back of his van. And he'll ride out of the back of the van on the bike. And it's not like one of the taller vans, it's a really kind of smallish van. So he has to duck really low to come out of it. Like, it has nothing to do with the comics. It has none of the stuff that makes Captain America Captain America. It's badly shot. The actor playing Steve Rogers is playing him like the dumbest person alive. Like, I would not hesitate to call him a himbo. Like, he is so dumb. He is like a block of wood. He cannot act at all. And it's just mind-numbingly boring. Like, oh, so terribly done, terribly put together. And yes, it's the first foray out into superhero films for Marvel stuff, and it was one of the earliest ones. And okay, but it's like you also rushed out a sequel in the same year, and it's also god awful. Like, I have a feeling this was meant to be a TV pilot. Like, this was originally going to be a show, and thank God it never got picked up, because no one would want to watch more than an episode of this. And, you know, it's like they had another chance, because they also made another Captain America film a few years later in 1990, and gave the same name with Captain America, and it's also terrible. It's not quite as bad as this. In fact, it will go on my dishonorable mentions, which I'll talk about now. For dishonorable mentions, Captain America 1990. It's not terrible. At least it follows the basic idea of the story. It is a soldier with super serum in World War II fighting the Red Skull, gets frozen, wakes up in modern time. But none of the story makes sense. It's not a great version of Steve Rogers. It's better than the 1970 version, because at least he's not a complete moron, but he's still pretty terrible. The weirdest thing about it is that his mask is designed with fake ears on the side. And it's just like, you couldn't cut holes to have his actual ears sticking out, or not just seal it so his ears aren't sticking out at all. You had to do this. And then everything with the Red Skull and his design was just also terrible. I mentioned, like, X-Men Dark Phoenix was someone else's. That's not the worst as the worst superhero film. That's not even the worst X-Men film. Worst X-Men film is X-Men Origins Wolverine. Like, that film has exactly 5 minutes of it actually good, and that's the opening credits with him and his brother fighting through all the different wars. But everything else in this film is terrible. Like, the opening scene about how he got his powers and him killing his own dad is just everything that they did with Wolverine and with his character and the choices that they made. They completely CGI'd the claws, and they look so fake and so terribly put together. Nothing about it makes sense. Nothing about it works. It's just an ugly film. And then they butcher Deadpool. Like, they cast the perfect person to be Deadpool in Ryan Reynolds. And then they're like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to sew his mouth shut for the final act and give him powers he never had. Like, why? Why would you do that? Like, you should, like, honestly, they should have killed him off and done Omega Red. Like, if they were going to do something stupid like that. Like, jeez Louise. But even, like, the other side characters also got butchered. Like, Blob got butchered, and they have a young Charles Xavier, and they have a young Emma Frost in there. Like, it just, none of it works. None of it is interesting. It's badly put together. It is easily the worst X-Men film. You can bring up, Dark Phoenix and Last Stand and freaking New Mutants. None of those are as bad as X-Men Origins Wolverine. I'm sorry. Even though Hugh's trying his best to make that film watchable, it's not. It really isn't. We also have Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance, which I like the first Ghost Rider film. I defend that film. I think that film was pretty good. But this one is just terrible. Like, everything about it is terrible. The only redeeming quality in it is Nick Cage, and him trying to play this up to, like, 11. But even, like, as far as Nick Cage freakouts go, this isn't even his strongest one. So it's just, it doesn't work. Nothing about it is really interesting. It's again superhero has to protect kid story, which like you think they eventually realize that that's not a great plot and stop doing it, but they keep doing it and it's never good. Like I just watched the Atom Project this a day or two ago, and that's the same plot. But at least that one had the interesting dynamic of him having to protect his younger self. I don't know. Anyway, like Ghost Rider, like the one cool thing is when he takes over that giant drilling machine and turns that into the Ghost Rider car. But everything about it, the way Ghost Rider moves, the way it's shot, it's just a truly terribly put together, terribly made film. Um, Amazing Spider-Man 2 nearly made the list. I considered it. I really did. It's pretty terrible. I waited years to watch it because I did not want to see it because I didn't like Amazing Spider-Man 1 that much. And I'm not a fan of Andrew Garfield's version of the character or the choices that they made with the series for this. So I was really hesitant to even watch it. And part of me feels I'm not fair to it. I only watched it the once and I don't think I gave it the attention it probably needed, but it's also a terrible film. Like I don't think anyone would disagree with me that this is actually a really really bad film. It's easily the worst Spider-Man film, like except for maybe like the 70s one which I haven't seen. So like literally all I need to think about is the scene where Gwen Stacy is falling and he fires the webbing to catch her and the webbing turned into a hand to reach out for her. Like, oh, what schmaltzy garbage that is. Like I don't even need to think about how they butchered Rhino and all the other characters and tried to shove in everything that they could. It's just that scene alone is enough to make me groan in pain. Superman 4 is not on my list of dishonorable mentions. It's not a great film. The effects on it are terrible. But the film itself, I think, is okay. Like, Christopher Reeves gets some good moments. It has some fun stuff in it. And I honestly, like, the fact the effects were so bad, actually, I kind of enjoyed that. It was kind of fun to watch a film and look at it and go, okay, that's a green screen. That's a reused image. That's a completely different image from a different movie. And that is clearly two toys on string. Like, it's not a good film, but I enjoyed it. And I think that if you take the bad effects out, the story itself isn't terrible, and it's nice to have Lex Luger back. You know what film was terrible? Superman 3. Like, jeez, yes, the Superman meets Richard Pryor movie was awful. Like, oh, I knew from the first 5 minutes that this film was god awful because they went full Three Stooges slapstick with it, and it just doesn't. No, it's not funny. It's not interesting. It's poorly shot. The plot makes no sense. The characters are stupid. The only slightly redeeming thing in the entire film is the scene where Superman splits in two and into Clark Kent and Superman and they have a fight. It's the only scene worth watching. It's not even that good. Terrible film. Like they cut out freaking Lois Lane from the film, had him falling in love with Lana Lang from Smallville. And then she's gone by the next film and he's got a new love interest. It's just I'm sorry, no, that's the worst Superman film. Except for maybe one of the animated films, because there's a Superman film called Superman Brainiac Attacks, which is based off of the Superman the Animated Series, which I liked. It's not my favorite. The Batman Animated Series and Justice League were way better, but it had its moments and had some really good stuff in it. This is sort of based off that, but it's not. The animation isn't good, the story isn't good, it's not well put together. It wasn't fun to watch. It's just, it feels like a really, really watered down version of the show. And there was one other animated film that I have to mention that that should have been on the list. I honestly, if I was making this list entirely based off my own actual opinion, this one would have been on my list, and that would be Batman The Dark Knight Returns Part 2. So, this is an animated film based off the famous Dark Knight Returns comic by Frank Miller. and they broke it up into two parts because it was super long. And the first half is fine. Part one did not bother me as much. It had some stuff that worked in it. Part two is a train wreck. Like, it is absolutely terrible. It is one of the most terrible things I've seen. Like, first off, Superman has aligned himself with President Richard Nixon and banned all of the other superheroes from being superheroes, and basically is working as an enforcer for Richard Nixon. What? Okay. Uh, Batman fires missiles at cops. And yes, he aims for the cars so they don't get hurt. You're still exploding cop cars with cops around the cars. Like, there's no way not a single cop didn't die in one of those explosions. Like, jeez Louise. Like, it's just... And then he fights Joker. And the first time, when I watched it, it looked like he broke Joker's neck, but I don't think that's actually what happened. Because what it looked like was Batman broke Joker's neck, Joker came back to life, laughed, and then broke his own neck again. But I think Batman was going to stop, and then Joker broke his own neck so that everyone would blame Batman. That said, that wasn't clear enough in what I saw to make that clear, so I'm still not 100% sure which is what I saw. And then, so you get to the end, and like, Superman was sent by Nixon to fight the Russians. The Russians launch a nuclear bomb. Superman takes the blast, and all of the power in the U.S. goes out from the nuclear blast. The only city that doesn't die and go into complete and utter chaos is Gotham, because Batman gets on a horse, rounds up all of the gangs of Gotham, gets them as his troopers, and keeps the city in line. It's the only thing in this film I like is that scene. And I really like the fact that the most recent The Batman did something really similar with him leading the people out of the wreckage with the torch. Like, that was the best part of that movie, and that film's pretty good. But, like, this is the best part of this film. So, what does Nixon do as a response to Batman keeping one of his cities from going crazy? He orders Superman to go kill Batman for being a vigilante and breaking the rules. And Batman agrees and goes and tries to do it. And so Batman puts on the mech suit and they have a fight. And I'm like, okay, this is definitely the source from where the Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice movie came from. The fight in that made more sense. Like, I 100% get Superman fighting to save his mom, who's being held by a supervillain, more than I'm going to kill Batman because President Nixon told me to. Seriously. Like, this to me is still one of the worst superhero films I've ever seen. And I wrote a whole review on it on Letterboxd. It is my highest liked review on there, because I'm clearly not the only person that had a similar response. But I can put it on my bottom 5 because I know there's a bunch of you that like that comic and think it's a great comic and would probably like this animation. Like, I tried to read the comic. It's the exact same thing. They didn't change enough for it to be like, it's completely different, that's why it doesn't work. Like, no, it looks spot for spot the same thing. I just don't like the story, and I think it's terrible. And I get people being impressed with that years ago because, you know, it was a first really dark Batman, and it's an alternate universe, and it's a thing where it's like, this is what could happen. But I'm like sitting there watching it going, I cannot see a universe where Superman would ever bow down to Richard Nixon and go kill people on Nixon's behalf. If any of the universes where that could even remotely happen, that would be bad Superman, and he would just kill Nixon and take over. Like, it's not good in any way. Now, if I chose to do the worst comic book films ever, here's a couple that would have been pretty close to the bottom of the list. AVP, Requiem, so Alien vs. Predator's Requiem. So I like AVP 1. I actually think that's a solid film. I mean, I know the problem with it is that it's PG-13, when they are two R-rated series. That never bothered me. I think the action's good. The story is okay enough, and it has some stuff in it that works out fairly well. AVP Requiem is a dumpster fire of a film. Nothing in it works. It's poorly shot. It's so dark you can't see what's going on. The new creature design isn't interesting or well done. The characters are terrible. The story is terrible. Nothing in it works. It is an absolute awful film to watch. And it's just terrible. R.I.P.D. Rest in Peace Department with Ryan Reynolds, Ryan Reynolds is in another film that makes this dishonorable mention, unfortunately, playing a similar kind of character of a quippy person. And here's how bad R.I.P.D. was bad enough that I listed it as the worst action film of the 2010s. Like, the worst action film of the entire decade of 2010s was R.I.P.D. for me. It is awful. The action isn't good. The story isn't good. The effects are terrible. The comedy is non-existent. It is a brain-meltingly dumb, awful film to watch. Not recommend in any way. Howard Lovecraft in the Frozen Kingdom, badly animated, not interesting in any way. I couldn't make it very far in this film. But one that actually would probably beat out my number one for this, if I was doing just comic books, this would probably be my actual number one, would be Son of the Mask. I don't think I need to go into huge details about why this is terrible. We all kind of know. You know, it's like if you couldn't get Jim Carrey to do this, you probably shouldn't have done the film to begin with. But then choosing to have it be about a baby and a dog trying to murder each other the whole time with absolutely atrocious CGI, even for 2005. Terrible acting, terrible characters. Nothing in this film is any good except for one thing. I do like Alan Cummings playing Loki, but that is still like a tiny, tiny ember or tiny, tiny gold nugget in the middle of the world's biggest dumpster fire. Like, it's not good enough to even warrant looking at any part of the film. Like, there's a lot better films with Alan Cumming in it. I would recommend any of them. I would recommend Spice World over Son of the Mask. But let's move on to number one. The Spirit. I'm surprised this hasn't shown up on more people's worst stuff list, because this film is absolute garbage. Just the worst. So, it's based off a comic book of the same name. And it's like nothing about this works. So it's shot in the same style as Sin City, where it's black and white except for occasional pops of color. Like the Spirit's tie. And it's just doesn't work. Like in Sin City, that had some point to it, some aesthetic. It added some life to that. This, it didn't work in any way. It was just a stupid ploy to try to get it closer to the comics, I guess. The Spirit is a terrible character, especially in this. Like, nothing about him works. It was interesting. His only power is that he cannot die. But you can still beat the crap out of him over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And guess what happens? And his personality is the worst. He spends the whole movie doing internal monologuing about the city and how he feels about it and how he wants to have sex with the city, because it's definitely what every single one of those sounds like. My city breathes. She yearns for me. Like, I'm amazed it's not a scene where you just see him screwing a wall. Like, and then when he's not going after the city, he's literally flirting with every single other woman in the film. Like, every single one. Like, and hardcore flirting, not like playful. Like, no, I'm amazed he is not humping their legs at points, because it's so bad. And all the women like it. Not a single woman is turned off by it. And it's just cringy and terrible. And I feel bad for the actor, because I like the actor. He went on to do Suits, and he's really good in Suits. But he is awful in this. He's unlikable in every regard. And then you have the villain, who's played by Samuel L. Jackson. Now, Samuel L. Jackson should save this film. He has saved a number of bad films. The only reason I think the reboot of RoboCop is any good is for his performance. He tries. But there are more than a few times in this where you could tell He has no idea how to save this film and can't think of anything to do this, make this even salvageable. Like, ugh. They have him dress up as a Nazi for some reason, and it just makes no sense. And it's poorly done. And they, like, he's like, I always have 8 of everything, so he pulls out 8 guns, and it's just, ugh. It's not funny. It's not interesting. It's horribly shot, horribly put together. It is. There's nothing in the film remotely redeemable. Like, the only thing that even tries to be remotely redeemable is Samuel L. Jackson, and he cannot save this film. Like, nothing in this film works at all. This, for me, is easily one of the worst films ever made, let alone, you know, worst comic book superhero films. And nobody ever talks about that when they bring up these lists. They just pass it over. I'm like, and I get that not a lot of people saw it. I saw it in theaters. I remember. It was awful. Like, jeez Louise, nothing about this film is any good. Nothing. There's not, like, Samuel L. Jackson does not make this film worth it. Nothing. Absolute dumpster fire. But that's just my opinion. What do you all think? Is there some of these that you would put worse? Do you actually think Dark Phoenix is worse than some of these films? Let me know in the comments below. If you let me know also if you'd like me to do the top 5. I don't know which ones I would necessarily put on that, because if I had to actually do a video like that, I would probably change my list a little bit. I'm not sure, but we can see. Let me know in the comments below if you're interested, and I may do that at a later point. Happy watching, happy reading, and I'll see you all later. Bye!